Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a video where I discuss books that I DNF'd, which is did not finish. I have decided not to continue these book series, so let's get into my list. Hopefully you're not too disappointed in me. The first book is an urban fantasy and it is by Patricia Briggs and it is the Mercy Thompson series. This follows Mercy, who is a mechanic, and she is also a shifter, so she's a coyote shifter, but she's not a were-coyote, there is a difference. So she lives next door to an alpha werewolf. There is a series of murders and a mysterious boy that show up in her neighborhood, and she takes responsibility by investigating these things, and it turns into a whole political shambles in the supernatural world. So while I like that premise and I love supernatural stories and I love urban fantasy as a genre in general, I read to the second book in this series and I just decided that I didn't like the romance because it was very domineering. And even though Mercy said things in her internal monologue and dialogue, she wouldn't act on them as clearly in her actions and out loud. So I found it very frustrating to kind of be restricted in her viewpoint. And so while it was enjoyable in terms of what the content was, it wasn't as enjoyable for me in Mercy's head. So unfortunately, after reading 2 into that series, I've decided not to continue anymore. The next one is actually pretty recent, and I read this in a reading vlog. I talked about it in a wrap-up lately. It is the Take Me to the Stars novella series by Sylvain Neuvel. I read the first book recently and I just did not love it, and I thought I would, but unfortunately it just didn't vibe with me. I didn't connect with the characters. This is a very loose premise, so it's really hard for me to describe what the plot is because I feel like it's deliberately vague because there's not really a plot in the first book. There's loosely a plot, but it's like it's there to entice you by the space race because it's a historical sci-fi and the mystery of these characters and their origins. So the entire driving force of the story is these 2 women, one's a mother, one's a daughter, and they are trying to convince the human race to go to space. And so with them in the story, there were also their rivals, which were these men who were seeking them out to murder them, and both sides seemed very morally grey, if not almost villainous. And then also at the same time, when they were interacting with pieces of the story that would inform the plot, I was like, this could be interesting, but without their intervention, these things seem like they would have happened anyway because they didn't seem to play as an integral role as they should be, or at least that I thought they should be. And so there's a bit of hit and miss there, and I didn't connect with the characters. The action scenes were okay, and so I gave it a 2 stars and I'm not going to continue reading them. So I don't know when the next book comes out. It's a novella series, it's not that long, but honestly it's just not really worth my time. If I gave the first book 2 stars, I'm likely not going to continue with the rest of the books whatsoever. And then after that is another recent book that I finished, and I also talked about it in my March-April wrap-up, and I listened to it on audiobook. It is by Fonda Lee and it's Jade City, which is the first book in the Greenbone saga. It's an Asian-inspired fantasy book, and Fonda Lee is a black belt, so lots of the action sequences in here were very visual and cinematic, and I loved that about them. I also loved the world building in here, with Jade being a currency and also giving people who rule over the Jade currency in this city a power, because Jade gives supernatural abilities of like speed and strength and awareness, not necessarily like shooting lightning from your hands kind of superpowers, but enhanced senses as a superpower. But if you have too much of it, it turns you into like a drug addict with really bad side effects that could end in death or that have ended in death. So I like that there is also a toll for that magic system. I like the characters and how they were all related to this gang family trying to maintain order and stop the cusp of a war from rolling into a massive blowout. And I liked aspects of it, but I didn't love it to the point where I was constantly interested because it had a lot of politics like layered thick over the story, and it just took me more than a month to listen to. And usually I smash audiobooks out really quickly. So that was just a bit upsetting because I thought I'd smash it and be obsessed with it. But when I finished it, I was like, oh, this is only a 3 stars. It had one moment in there that was 4-star worthy, but the rest of it kind of just, you know, went in one line. It wasn't particularly climatic or anything. So it got a 3, and I don't think I'm going to continue it just based on the fact that I know that if I didn't love the first book, I'm probably not going to be obsessed with the second. So it's not like I'm never going to read this book ever in the future whatsoever. But at this point in my life, I don't have any plans to pick it up. So that might change in the future, but for now, I'm not really keen on continuing. And then after that is Parasite by Mara Grant. I might have talked about this before, but I wanted to capture this year's and last year's books in my reading that I'm not going to continue. And so Parasite by Mara Grant, she's the same author that wrote Every Heart a Doorway, and those are portal fantasy series of kids going through a door that suits them to their soul and then coming back from a magical world into our world and having to re-assimilate. I really like that concept. So Mara Grant, she wrote a zombie book, and this is under a pen name. Obviously it's a different genre and different audience, so I guess she's tried to vary herself there. But when I was reading Parasite, it just felt like I was supposed to be on the edge of my seat, and it was like it was on a cusp of something, but the delivery just felt very flat and passive. And so when I was reading scenes that were supposed to be climactic and interesting and increase the tension, I was only kind of enjoying them. And so when I got to the end of it, I think I gave it a 3 as well, and that might have been a generous rating because on retrospect I think it's a 2, just because of how flat it was and how disappointed I was after reading it, because I love the Every Heart Had Always series, and so I thought I would love this other book by her as well, and that just wasn't the case. So it was like an urban setting with the zombie outbreak kind of brewing rather than actually being in the middle of a zombie apocalypse kind of thing. So I thought, oh, that would be a really interesting perspective to explore, because obviously civilization is still ticking over. But unfortunately, it just didn't really hit the mark, and that is why I'm not continuing it either. I did have the second book, but I've since unhauled both of them. Next, I have 2 books by the same author, and this might surprise you because I loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. However, she's written some other stuff that I've been kind of lukewarm on. So the one that I'm talking about is The Archived, and that is a series in the Vault, I think, and it's got another book in it with a third that's not yet published because the publisher did a bit of a shady deal with V.E. Schwab when she first got into publishing. So if it's not even a series that's finished yet, and also it is by a publisher that did their author a dirty, I don't want to give money to them in order to get the sequel, and I already have the first book in a different edition and I've read it. So I think I'm just going to cut myself off from that point and not continue this one either. Another one that I'm comfortable with not continuing is the A Darker Shade of Magic comic book series. That's the prequel to the trilogy. In the prequel we follow Maxim himself, and this is obviously before he's been coronated. He is called the Steel Prince, and he obviously has a supernatural ability in this world. It's called Red London, so there are a lot of magical properties to this world. There's also white and black and grey Londons as well. So some people called the Antari, I think. I don't know how I remember that. That just came back into my head. They're like blood magic, and so they can traverse between worlds. So there is one of those in A Darker Shade of Magic, and his name is Kel. I love that trilogy. I didn't love the Steel Prince comic, and it just felt very predictable, and it didn't really vary the theme. So I love tropes, and tropes can be done really well, but when they are just leaned really heavily on and they're relied upon to get the story across, and they don't really have any grey or subversion in between them, that is when I find it boring because it's very predictable, and I just didn't love the way that the Steel Prince handled its story. So I think I have the first volume, and it is signed, and I don't plan on getting rid of it, but as far as the series is concerned, it's likely that I'm not going to continue. There is, however, another series that V.E. Schwab is writing in the same world called A Touch of Power, and I'm very keen on continuing that. So, you know, I think in this case I just prefer her written work, kind of like in a different video that I talked about with Brandon Sanderson and White Sand. I prefer his written version to his graphic novel version, and I think I just prefer V.E. Schwab's written work compared to her graphic novel work. The next one that I want to talk about is a popular fantasy book. Actually, both of them are. Rage of Dragons is the next one, and this is a series that got hyped up a lot with how brutal and dark and how good the combat was. And while that is definitely a strength of the book, the weakness of the book is that it doesn't sit long enough with its characters for you to understand them, because it felt very surface with character, but it felt really deep when it came to the type of strategy and combat they liked. I very much understood that aspect, but when it came to like the academy vibe, it didn't really suit that, because I thought that there would be some kind of camaraderie, but while that was built into the story, it just didn't seem very genuine, and I wanted a lot more of it. So I did give that a 3 as well, and I just found it mediocre. So when people hyped it up to me, I was like, and unfortunately I just didn't get on the bandwagon. There are a few popular books in this video that I'm like, meh, when it comes to their hype, which is similarly like the next one, and that is Malice by John Gwynne. This is another one that I just found okay rather than amazing. It was 600 pages and it felt very dry because the pace was just very slow. I think I read this in a reading vlog actually, so I have more thoughts then, and I probably got a better synopsis then as well. All I remember now is that it was multiple perspective, high adult fantasy with giants and magic on the cusp of a war and potentially bringing magic back to the forefront of, I don't know, society or battle, I guess. And we follow a young boy who is in this town, which is like the classic farm boy trope of like the chosen one coming to his power. So I liked the premise, but I didn't love the book, and it took me a very long time and a lot of mental fortitude to get through the book. I should have just DNF'd it. I'm glad I didn't, because now I have a full picture of what my thoughts are about that book. but I should have just DNF'd it and saved myself the struggle because it put me in a reading slump. So I'm not going to continue with the quartet, and I'm pretty sure I've unhauled all of them. So that gets them off my TBR and I don't need to worry about them anymore. After that is A River of Royal Blood, and this is a young adult fantasy, and this is definitely not a bad book, but I think I just missed the boat on it because I did really enjoy it. And I don't remember a synopsis, but I did read it at the end of 2020 because it was one of the last books on my TBR that I had owned at the time, and I wanted to get my TBR to 0, which I did. So I liked the book. It was intriguing, it had great world building and magic, it had such interesting character build up. But in terms of the plot and the scope of the book, I just didn't love it as much as an adult fantasy that I would have read recently because, you know, I think I've grown out of young adult for the most part. Some of them that are very specific in what they put in the blurb or very specifically what reviewers say about them before and after release. I think I need to just dig down into narratives and figure out what people say about things rather than what they're hyping about things, because this is another quite popular one and I understand why. It is popular for a reason, but it's just not my taste. So I did like it, but I passed it on because I don't have it anymore, and that is another series that I'm not going to continue. This next one might surprise you because this was on one of my goals videos for this year, but I've decided that it's just a bit of a hard ask and I don't think I'm going to be able to continue, and that is The Passage by Justin Cronin. This is a apocalyptic book. It's set in our time and then there's a 100-year time skip, and it's like a vampire apocalypse situation, and you follow a group of early 20s kids in this camp, or in this fortress, I guess. Bit of a difference between camp and fortress. Anyhow, they're in kind of like a living situation and they have to essentially fight against the vampire apocalypse. I don't want to give away too much because vampire apocalypse should be enough to hook you if you are generally interested in this, but if I hadn't listened to the audiobook, I think I would have really struggled because the first section didn't capture my attention. When it got past 100 pages, then I was in. So there were a few things about this book that I loved and didn't love, but apart from that, I don't think I feel the necessary hunger to push forward and continue reading these, especially because they're really bloody long. Like this is what, more than 800 pages. Yeah, it's like 900 pages. So I doubt that I'm going to continue these books because the audiobooks are over 25 hours each, and that is honestly just too much for me at the moment. I've lowered my reading goal to 50 instead of 100, so I think I just need to take it easy if I'm also reading a bunch of other longer fantasy series. I think this is going to be parked for a while. I don't know if this is an official DNF forever, but at the moment I just don't feel it, so it's a DNF as it stands. And we are on to the last two. So one of them is actually a comic series, and I've been telling myself that I'm going to keep reading this for a while. But I've since decided that that is unrealistic because I've fallen out of love with the art style, and it's The Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman. This series, I loved the first volume of illustration, but after the first volume the illustrator changed and I didn't really love the new style. It took me a while to figure out who was who and to differentiate between everybody appearing on the page, and so while it has a gritty story, while I love zombie books and zombie things, and it has such gritty characters as well, and very unpredictable things that happen, I just couldn't get into the comics. So if the artist who did the first volume did the rest of them, I'd 100% buy them and be invested. But as it stands now, I've got a couple of volumes and I just haven't read them because I'm not interested in continuing if it's not the artist I like. So unfortunately, The Walking Dead is a DNF for me. And now we've come to the last one on this list, and that is one that I said to myself that I would try and read because I tried to read it last year and it didn't work, and that is The Bone Witch by Rincha Pecco. This is a book that I read the first in, and it's a trilogy. However, I got all of them on audiobook even though I own all of them physically, and I was hoping that I could make some headway on rereading the first book and reading the rest of them. Hasn't happened. I haven't even thought about it since, so the fact that it hasn't even entered my radar means that I'm not interested, and I've kind of missed the boat for that one. I liked the first one. It had young adult fantasy, Asian inspired Memoirs of a Geisha vibes with also kind of Name of the Windish vibes, I suppose, and I like the magic system with the heart's glass, but apart from that I didn't really care for it. It's told in 2 timelines, and while that is interesting and was interesting and intriguing to me at the time, I just don't feel the need to continue. So unfortunately I'm getting rid of these as well. So that's it. That's the end of this video. These are the series that I'm DNFing for now, mostly forever, but not all of them. I don't know. I was decisive and now I'm indecisive, but I've made this video so I can be decisive. So these are the books that I'm DNFing. Let me know if any of these you're DNFing as well. I would love to hear, but come and chat to me down below. I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.